I'm thrilled to be joined by Suzanne Nossel. She's the CEO of PEN America. She's also the author of Dare to Speak, Defending Free Speech for All. Suzanne was formerly a member of the Obama administration in the State Department, Human Rights Watch, and Amnesty International. Suzanne, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
We had a great event earlier this week at the New York Public Library talking about the history of book banning in America. And there was a distinction that was made on that by one of our prior Velshi Banned Book Club guests, Laurie Halse Anderson. And it was the distinction about parents who have good faith fears about their children learning about explicit material in books in school versus this organized effort to ban books because it challenges control. Let's just talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. Look, of course, parents need to have a say in their kids' education, and there is legitimate room for debate about what is the right age to bring up certain concepts. Should we be talking about gender identity and sexuality with very young children? And that needs to be a give and take within communities where teachers have a say, parents have a say. But the problem with this rash of book banning is it really overrides any reasoned discussion to talk about, look, what are the merits of introducing these ideas to young children? How can it be done appropriately? You know, is it sort of seeding ideas that children wouldn't otherwise be exposed to for a long time? But we can't have sort of that calm, rational civic debate when people are waging war on books, when they're using this as an ideological tool. And that's what we see right now. It's a very confrontational, hostile approach that isn't kind of the dialogue that we need to resolve what, I think are legitimate issues that we should be able to talk about.
So somebody, one of the members of the audience at the New York Public Library the other day submitted a question, which I thought was great. It's like, could we just make sure people who want to ban books actually read them?
Absolutely. I mean, look, one of the things that comes out in our report, about 4% of all the bans across the country follow any kind of established procedure. And look, there are procedures for this. There may be a book that doesn't belong in a second grade classroom. And, the procedures sort of say you bring a challenge. You say, look, here's what's wrong with this, why I don't think it's the right thing. Educators and parents look at it together. They read the book.
Right.
They come to a reasoned decision. And when that happens, I think we can all accept the outcome. There needs to be, some way to bring up these
It doesn't
concerns.
feel like banning at that point, right? It feels like curating your curriculum.
That's right. I mean, look, we might disagree with the grounds upon which a committee would render a decision, but nonetheless, it's a lot easier to accept sort of a reasoned, methodical process than these wholesale bans, taking an entire list of books that no one has read.
Right.
And,
based on either their name or their author or the characteristics of the author. So one of the things we talk about here is that sometimes it's the book, sometimes it's the author, sometimes it's the actual words on the page. If you've taken this list that you have all prepared at PEN America, one gets the impression this is more political than it is about literature.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, we've dealt with book bans for a long time. In my time at Penn, for the first years, it was a few a year. There'd be a parent or librarian here or there who'd have a concern. We'd usually write a letter, and that would get the book restored back onto the shelves. This is something very different. It's an organized, well-resourced movement. They've clearly decided this is an issue that riles people up. I think it's not a pocketbook issue, but a backpack issue. It's something that comes into the home.
Right.
And it's sort of become a galvanizing tool that clearly organized groups have decided this is going to help them gin up members, get people riled up to vote in elections. We saw what happened in Virginia with Glenn Youngkin, sort of playing up this issue.
It became a very key issue in that election.
And I expect more of that as we come closer to the midterms. So, that has to be recognized. People have to understand this is not fully on the level. This is not just a reasoned discussion between parents and school leaders about what should be taught in the classroom. This is part of an organized ideological movement that really is trying to push back against the tide of demographic change, the effort to become a more inclusive, more equal, pluralistic society. So we see, obviously, similar trends in trying to restrict voting rights, and this is of a piece with that.
Let's go to that election, the Glenn Youngkin election. There was an ad that featured a mother who was expressing concern about a book. Was it Beloved by Toni Morrison?
Yes.
It was, right? And the argument was it's uncomfortable, right? Which is maybe for some people a good faith argument that a lot of these things make people uncomfortable. Almost every one of the books we've featured on this, and by the way, anybody who reads anything by Toni Morrison, it's going to be uncomfortable. What's the reasoned way in which you explain to people who might be uncomfortable with their children reading something that discomfort is an important part of the process and the learning process?
Absolutely. Look, in an open society and in democracy, we believe that exposure to ideas is what helps us refine our thinking, come up with better ideas, discern the truth. And children, as they grow up, need to be exposed to a breadth of narratives. They need to understand the world that they're going to live in, the kinds of people that they're going to be dealing with. And, I think for all of us, reading was such a crucial window to get beyond, the confines of our own lived experience and trigger empathy, be able to understand what other people are dealing with. So discomfort, if you're a free expression advocate, I mean, the irony of this is that conservatives sort of style themselves as great First Amendment defenders. And, the whole point of it, you wouldn't need the First Amendment if we were just dealing with content that made all of us comfortable.
Right.
You wouldn't have, nobody would challenge free speech. You wouldn't need to rise in support of it. And so that's the whole point, is that which is edgy, uncertain, controversial is what we need to protect. And that's what these books represent.
There's an important thing. The chair of this year's Banned Book Week is an author, one of the earliest authors we had on the Velshi Banned Book Club, George M. Johnston, the author of All Boys Aren't Blue. I'd asked them for their take on why that book is targeted so heavily. And what they said is that the book talks about the truth of the black queer experience as a young person. And he said there are people, and almost every author has told me this when they talk about LGBTQ issues or sexual assault, is that someone has written to them to thank them for giving them a way out, or in some cases it saved lives because someone sees themselves in the experience. That's another element of this. It may be uncomfortable for a lot of people, but for a lot of young people, this is the first time they see someone telling their story.
No, absolutely. And these books can be life-saving. If you think of a kid who's growing up isolated, they can't reveal their identity to their family, to their community, to their teachers and peers. The book is a window to a different life where they can sort of see that it could get better, that there may be a place for them over time. Unfortunately, that's what the banners are afraid of. It's going to somehow seed ideas, and that children who, aren't struggling with these issues are going to somehow be implanted with the notion of a different identity that their parents are not comfortable with. And so, that's sort of right at the nub of it. But we have heard likewise persistently that there are people for whom these books are lifesavers. They're lifelines. And I think librarians and educators hear that from them as well.
Yeah.
Even in conservative places, in a place like Texas, where librarians acknowledge that for some children or teens, these books are just an absolute lifeline.
Thank you for being here. Thanks for the work that you're doing. And for those of you out there, take a look at what PEN America publishes on this. It is remarkable, remarkable information. Suzanne Nossel is the CEO of PEN America, the author of the book Dare to Speak.